Nightmare or Nix by Penstroke and Batty Glue. The second in the In the Family series, Side Stories to Past Sins. Spike closed his eyes and shielded his face as a murder of crows took flight in front of him. They had been stirred by the tolling bell, driven into the bleak night sky. His eyes followed the crows, and he noticed just how pitch black it was. No stars, no clouds. The only light came from the moon, and even it seemed faded, as if it was hiding from something. He was standing in the streets of Ponyville, though they were oddly deserted. There were no ponies, there were no animals, and the only sound came from the wind gusting and moaning between the buildings and the trees. The chill in the air was creeping up his spine. Out of instinct, he reached around to hold his tail in his claws. "Spike! What are you doing out here?" Twilight's voice was a welcome sound, and, with a wide smile, Spike turned to look at her. She was standing in an intersection half a block away. She was holding a lantern high in the air with magic. Its warm, flickering light seemed to burn with the strength of a lighthouse on the dark shore. I don't know," Spike said, as he began to walk towards her. "I don't even remember coming outside." "Well, you must have been sleepwalking," Twilight said as she drew closer. "Come on, let's get back inside." Twilight's lantern flickered, and her eyes widened. She breathed out, and the air from her lungs became a misty cloud in the suddenly cold air. The darkness behind her seemed to loom up. It rose, and from its depth a dark laugh echoed. The darkness then came, crashing down like a tidal wave upon the shore, consuming Twilight whole. The shadows crashed against Spike, sending him tumbling down the street. He heard Twilight's lantern crashing to the ground, and witnessed its light fade from existence. Twilight screamed, but her voice was already distant, as if she was being whisked away in a flying chariot. Spike scrambled to his claws and began to run after Twilight. He could see the glint of her horn. She was trying to free herself, but the darkness held strong. It was carrying her westward, and the moon was racing in the same direction. It began to set, and as it did, its pale light revealed tall, threatening spires and thick battlements. Spike's heart skipped a beat. Twilight was being taken to the castle built by the Children of Nightmare for their queen, Nightmare Moon. He ran as fast as his claws would carry him, but the castle didn't seem to get any closer. It stayed on the horizon, constantly out of reach, as if he was trying to run and catch the moon itself. "Where are you going, Spike?" Skidding to a stop, Spike turned to look down a nearby alleyway. There, looking at him with curious, innocent, yet somehow threatening eyes, was Nix. She stepped out of the darkness of the alley, revealing that she didn't have her headband, glasses, or vest on. There was nothing to hide her alicorn nature, or the diamond-shaped pupils of her eyes. "I'm going to save Twilight," he shouted at her. "Something took her and—" Once more, the tolling of the bells filled the air, drawing Spike's attention back to the castle on the horizon. The spires of the castle bent back, creaking and groaning as they formed something of a stage with the top of the castle's outer walls. There, in the centre of it all, he saw Twilight's silhouette against the moon, and she was standing beneath a hangmare's noose. The blood in Spike's veins turned to ice, and he could only watch as another silhouette stepped into view. It was a tall, slender alicorn, similar to Princess Celestia, but at the same time it was infinitely more terrifying. Spike shouted again. He tried to run forward, tried to resume his panicked sprint towards the castle. Something, however, stepped into the path ahead of him, blocking his way. "Where are you going, Spike? Don't you want to play?" Nix asked, her mouth twisting into a manic grin. "Nix, get out of the way!" Spike bellowed, but Nix did not comply. Instead, her eyes flashed and her body began to grow. She grew tall, slender, and her mane changed to look like a bleak night sky speckled with only the faintest of stars. Her flat teeth in her mouth became fangs, and armour grew around her skin. "Is that any way to speak to your queen?" Nyx bellowed as she continued to grow. She became as tall as a tower, dwarfing the nearby buildings and making Spike as small as a bug in comparison to her stature. And like it truly was a bug, Nightmare Moon lifted her hoof, and with a loud cackle, drove it back down, trying to stomp Spike into oblivion. He dove clear at the last moment and quickly scrambled back to his feet. He broke into a run, sprinting towards the distant castle as Nightmare Moon pursued him and shouted, "Don't run away, Spike! Don't you want to play?" Spike continued to run, trying to flee. He looked for some place to hide, but all of Ponyville seemed to have disappeared into darkness. The only thing that remained visible was the silhouettes of the castle against the moon. Twilight was still there. The hangmare's noose had only just been fitted around her neck. He could save her. He could do it. He just had to. The castle's bell tolled, and Spike felt his foot catch on a rock. He tumbled forward, hitting the ground hard. The wind was knocked from his chest, and he turned over onto his back to catch his breath. Yet, when he tried to take the first deep gasp, he instead found more air squeezed out from his lungs. Nightmare Moon, once more her normal size, had put her hoof down on his chest. She was pressing down, applying more and more pressure to his ribcage. Spike looked to the castle and found himself on the verge of tears. The silhouette beside Twilight was rearing back and looked as if it was about to buck her off the wall. She was going to fall. The noose was going to take her away from him. Nightmare Moon was going to take Twilight away from him. Twilight was bucked. She began to fall, and no matter how he struggled, Spike couldn't free himself from Nightmare Moon's hoof. He clawed at her, blew fire, but he could not escape. He couldn't save her. All he could do was scream with all the strength his lungs could manage as Nightmare Moon laughed in triumph. Spike sat up in his bed, panting heavily, as beads of sweat ran down his head. He looked around in a panic, looking for Nightmare Moon and the silhouetted castle. All he found, however, was the library bedroom. The clock in the room had just finished chiming, announcing it was 10 in the morning. "Spike, are you okay?" He couldn't help but flinch and quickly look to his side. Nyx was standing beside his basket, looking concerned. Like in his dream, she wasn't wearing her glasses, headband or vest. But she also wasn't giving off the creepy, threatening aura that had been part of his nightmare. "Yeah, I just had a bad dream," he said as he began to calm down. "Twilight has me tell her about my bad dreams," Nyx commented, as she watched Spike pull himself out of his basket. "She says it can help to talk to some pony about them. Do you want to talk to me about it?" "No, I don't," Spike answered. He groaned, pulled himself out of bed, and began to walk towards the stairs. "Now come on, it's time for breakfast." Nyx glanced at the clock. Isn't it a little late for breakfast?" "If that's what you think, then. Hey, more for me," Spike said as he began to descend the library's staircase. Eyes wide with panic, Nyx scrambled after Spike. "I take it back, I want breakfast too." Spike sat at the table, munching on a cheap gemstone, as Nyx ate a bowl of cereal. The library was oddly quiet considering it was so late in the morning, but that was because Twilight wasn't there. She was in Canterlot, filling out some paperwork so that she would have documented proof that she had been given legal custody of Nyx by the princesses. Twilight was also taking the opportunity to visit her parents. It was a chance to show them that she was alright and try to convince them that she had taken Nyx on as adoptive daughter by choice. They were understandably scared that she was being brainwashed. That meant that Spike was left to take care of the library and Nyx until Twilight came back. Something he wasn't keen on. It was a lot of extra work. He had to clean the shelves and help ponies find books by himself. It was easier when Twilight was around. She could reach the books on high shelves with her magic. He had to climb up the ladder. He also wasn't so sure he wanted to false-sit Nyx. He had smiled and laughed right along with Twilight the day Nyx came back to the library and discovered she had her cutie mark. He had been happy because things seemed to have gone back to normal. Things were the way they were supposed to be. The way they were before Princess Celestia came to the library to take Nyx away. But Nyx wasn't the same anymore. She had a temper now. She had thrown 2 tantrums about not being able to pick up a book with her magic. It would have likely been free if Twilight hadn't let Nyx have her old toy, Smarty Pants. The prospect of being allowed to keep the toy had calmed and distracted Nix for a few days. Taking another bite of his gem like he was eating an apple, Spike just sat and watched Nix. She was trying to lift a spoon with her magic, and was meeting only minor success. She was able to lift the spoon, a small triumph in its own right. The spoon, however, didn't stay in place. It floated and waved in the air, and it seemed to be actively trying to avoid Nix's mouth. "You can just eat out of the bowl, you know," Spike commented. "No, I've got it," Nix said as she kept her eyes focused on her spoon. She stood up in her seat, put her hoof on the table. She stretched out her whole body, trying to reach the wayward spoon. She stuck her tongue out and managed to rest it on the rim of the spoon. Another inch and she would have the food it held in her mouth. At that moment, however, was when her hoof lost its grip on the table. She slipped and crashed it face first into the bowl of cereal. Spike held up his claws, shielding himself from the resulting spray of milk. When he dared to look again, he saw bits of soggy cereal splattered across the table. Nix lifted her face out of a bowl of cereal, milk dripping from her coat. She was sniffling, and she lifted a hoof to hold her sore nose. "Nice nosedive, Nix," Spike joked, a small laugh escaping his throat. The tears that had been pulling at Nix's eyes evaporated, and her pupils narrowed into threatening slits. She slammed her hooves against the table, spread her wings, and, with a flare of her horn, she picked up the bowl in her magic. Spike ducked as the bowl was sent flying at his head, accompanied by Nix's scream of, "I didn't do it on purpose!" "Hey!" Spike said. He was trying to be firm, but he was struggling to quell the tremor in his voice. "You're making a mess. Stop it." Nix's anger faded as fast as it had swept over her. She quickly lifted her hooves to her mouth, frightened by her own outburst. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to." "Yeah, well, sorry won't clean this up," Spike said as he got down from his seat at the table. "And I'm not cleaning it either. Spike made me clean up the ink you spilt when you got angry and threw that book. Now it's your turn." "But I can't do it by myself. I can't reach the sink to get the water." Spike glared at Nix before turning his back to her and stepping over to the kitchen closet. He rummaged through the closet for just a moment before pulling out a step stool, which he set in front of the sink, and then began to walk towards the door. "There, now you can. Have fun." With that, Spike slipped out of the kitchen door and shut it behind him. Only then did he allow himself to shiver. He reached for his tail and held it in his claws as he leaned against the kitchen door. In that moment of rage, when Nix had screamed and thrown her bowl, he hadn't seen the innocent filly she was supposed to be. No, the thing he had seen sitting across from him was a very young Nightmare Moon, in all her terrible anger. "I'm sure she isn't as bad as you say, Spike. You didn't see her, Rarity," Spike said. He stood beside her, holding a spool of fabric as a number of pins protruded from his thick scales on his back. A few hours had passed since Nix finished cleaning up the kitchen, and now she was off with her friends at Sweet Apple Acres, where Big Macintosh was keeping an eye on them. That meant he had the afternoon to himself, and he had chosen to spend it at one of his favourite places in the entire world, at Rarity's side. "Nix throwing a bowl doesn't mean she's turning evil again," Rarity lectured as she took a pin from his back and used it to secure a hem. "And, if you'll pardon me saying this, it sounds like you provoked her." "I just made a joke. She had face-planted into a bowl of cereal. What would you have done?" Rarity took another pin from Spike's back. She tilted her head to the side, examining the fabric flower she was about to secure to her hat. "I think you're mistaking me for Rainbow Dash, Spike. I would have asked if she was okay and helped her clean up. Rainbow Dash is the one that would have made a joke, and I'd like to think that she would have made sure Nix was okay afterwards." "I would have asked if she was okay, but she didn't give me a chance. She just exploded," Spike said, trying to defend himself. "And why are you making me sound like I'm the bad guy?" He set down the spool of fabric he had been holding, and then stepped between Rarity and the outfit she was working on. "I'm not the one that attacked Canterlot. I'm not the one that hurt the princesses. I'm not the one that almost got Twilight killed. It was her." "Spike, calm down," Rarity said. She set the pin and fabric she was holding down. Then she lifted her hoof and rested on Spike's shoulder. "I'm not saying you're a bad guy." Spike turned away from Rarity and crossed his arms. "It sure sounds that way." Rarity smiled as she scrunched up her nose and pinched Spike's cheek with her magic. "Oh, Spikey Wikey, how could I ever think such a cutesy-wootsy little dragon like you could be a bad guy?" Spike giggled and held his cheek as he began to rock back and forth on his feet. "Rarity, stop it. I'm not cutesy-wootsy."
"You're right," Rarity said as she began to resume her work. "You're a handsome young dragon I consider to be a dear friend." You do?" Spike said, his heart fluttering in his chest. "Yes, I do," Rarity confirmed, before she glanced at him out of the corner of an eye. "You're my friend, even if you did carry me halfway up a mountain on a greed-driven rampage." What?" Spike said, a look of confusion spreading on his face, and his emotions bombarded from smitten joy to confusion and disbelief. That wasn't my fault." "I'm not saying that, Spike. Every pony in Ponyville, including myself, understands that you couldn't control the way you were behaving that day." Rarity placed the final pin, finishing the hem placement on the outfit she was working on. "We've all forgiven you for that." "Then why did you bring it up?" "I brought it up, Spike, because was Nix's situation so different from your own?" Spike stood dumbstruck for a moment. His mind turned over Rarity's words, and, as it failed to comprehend what she meant, he began to get angry. He clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. "It's not the same," he bellowed. "It's totally different. I didn't know what I was doing. She did. She did all of it on purpose. It's all her fault." "Spike, please. I don't want to hear it." He turned and began to stomp towards the door. "You and Twilight. Nix has got you both wrapped around her little hoof, and you don't even realise it." "Spike," Rarity called out. He, however, didn't turn back. He marched out the front door of the boutique and slammed the door shut behind him. Spike kicked at a stone as he walked down a dirt path outside of Ponyville. A poor night's sleep, Nix's temper tantrum that morning, and his first ever argument with Rarity had officially put him in a bad mood. He was walking without a destination. He didn't want to go back to Carousel Boutique or the library. He didn't want to go anywhere. He just wanted to walk and fume and try to understand why Rarity and Twilight couldn't see what he did. Nix wasn't the same. She was still dangerous. She was one bad tantrum away from changing her name back to Nightmare Moon. Kicking the rock again, Spike watched it bounce down the path before it struck against fresh-cut stone. His eyes moved up and looked upon high battlements and towering spires that cast long shadows like claws reaching across the land. It was Nightstone Castle. The frown on his face deepened as he looked across the castle, the seat of Nightmare Moon's reign over Equestria. It was worthy of its name, Nightstone. Every brick and slab had been carved by diamond dogs from the dark rock of their old mines. Its architecture personified the feeling of fear and dominance that its queen was meant to embody. It was, in every way, the perfect castle for Nightmare Moon. Spike placed a claw on the stone and began to slowly walk the castle's perimeter. The stonework was still clean and crisp. Weather and time hadn't had a chance to smooth the stones. It was very different in comparison to the stonework of Canterlot. The palace, the whole city of Canterlot, was like a smooth stone one found at the beach. It had been polished into something more beautiful by nature and the ponies who call it home. Nightstone Castle, conversely, was like a freshly sharpened sword. Continuing along the outside wall, Spike walked until he reached the castle's gatehouse. The gates had been barred and sealed when the last of the refugees left. Yes, closed gates meant nothing to Pegasi, who could just fly over the walls, but the town's greater concern, however, was keeping school-aged ponies, including young Pegasi who couldn't fly yet, from exploring and defacing the castle. Moving up to the castle's gates, Spike placed his hand on the wooden timbers that formed the outer doors. He remembered something he had heard ponies talking about while he had been walking next to Sweet Apple Acres earlier that day. There was a standing disagreement in Ponyville of what to do with the castle. Proposals had been made to turn it into a school, a museum, a tourist trap, a summer home for the princesses, and some had argued that they wanted to see it demolished. Spike counted himself among the last group. The castle needed to be levelled. He tapped his claw against the gates. He wasn't supposed to go inside. That was why the gates were closed after all. Still, Spike found himself contemplating how to get in. With his claws, it would be easy enough to climb the walls, but any pony looking in the direction of the castle would see him, and then he'd get into trouble. No, he needed a way in, but no pony would notice. Smiling, Spike stepped back and got down on all fours. He felt the soft, fine gravel of the gemstone quarries beneath his claws. He toyed with the dirt for a moment before digging into the earth with impressive speed. He went a couple of feet down, a couple of feet forward, and then a couple of feet straight back up. He hit daylight and poked his head out of the tunnel with a triumphant smile.
He had dug under the gate and was now in the castle's courtyard.
Don't know why Twilight is so worried that the mayor's going to tear this place down, Spike commented. He pulled himself out of the hole and brushed the dirt with his claws. I bet I could build a better castle if I had a cult of ponies worshipping me.
He raised his claws up in front of his face, framing his view.
Yeah, my castle would have a moat with jets of water and a big statue of Rarity, about there. And then I'd have a water slide from my bedroom all the way to the Royal Gemstone Treasury. Yeah, the treasury, where I would have all the fire rubies and sapphires I could eat.
Spike lowered his claws and placed them on his stomach, which gave a small growl. The thought of jewels had made him realise that he was really hungry, which in turn made him glare at his own belly. He was annoyed he would have to go back to Ponyville to get something to eat within minutes of sneaking into Nightstone Castle. Then again, he knew of some gemstones that no pony would miss.
Come on,
Spike grumbled. He picked up the stone he had brought from the outside of the castle, arched his arm and hurled it upwards. It soared through the air and clattered against the ceiling. Spike's objective were the many gemstones mounted above him as part of the throne's mural. It was a veritable buffet, and he had his eyes on the largest of the gems, a singular diamond, which was the moon in the jewelled-studded depiction of the night sky. The rock struck the large diamond, as it had several times, but the gem remained firmly attached to the ceiling. The stone dropped to the floor again, as he had done before. Spike went to pick it up and try again. He was beginning to see the folly in his efforts, and the grumbling in his stomach had only worsened with the exertion of throwing the stone.
Maybe I should just go back,
Spike mumbled to himself after picking up the stone. It was only then when he noticed where it had fallen, and where he was standing. He was a mere inches from the throne, which towered over him as Nightmare Moon had in his dream. He recognised the look and even the smell of the wood it was carved from. It was from a tree he had seen in the gardens of Celestia's school, a tree that mimicked the appearance of being burnt and was naturally resistant to fire. Dropping a stone, Spike placed a claw on the throne and hauled himself up. He plopped down onto the soft cushion and leaned back in the throne as he looked out across the empty room.
Not a bad seat, he commented before he crossed his arms and puffed out his chest. I am Nightmare Moon, and I demand all the Nightmare Night candy. What? There isn't any candy? Well, I guess I'm going to have to eat all of you instead. Nom 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 nom.
Startled, Spike belched a burst of flame and threw his weight into the back of the throne. The chair teetered, and despite Spike's best efforts to right it, it toppled over backwards. He rolled out of it after it fell and ended up crashing against the wall beneath the throne room's blown-out windows. He groaned and rubbed a spot on his back. It was sore, but it wasn't too bad. At worst, he would have a small bruise. After touching the tender spot for a few more moments, Spike pulled himself up off the floor. He placed a claw on the wall and looked through the blown-out windows to see a cascading circular rainbow over Ponyville.
Damn it, Rainbow Dash! Don't scare me like that!
Spike shouted out of the window as he shook his fist in the air. He, however, quickly regretted his words. The rainbow contrail that followed out from the sonic rainboom was turning in his direction. Spike ducked down and, in a panic, he looked around the throne room. He needed a place to hide. He needed to get out of the castle. He needed...
Spike? What are you doing here?
Wincing, Spike looked up to see Rainbow Dash hovering in the air above him. She had her head cocked to one side and an eyebrow arched. Her arrival was faster than he would have normally expected, but at the same time, she had just done a sonic rainboom. Travelling at supersonic speeds made it really easy to get anywhere quickly. Standing straight up, Spike put a claw behind his head and leaned back. He forced an innocent smile. Nothing. What are you doing here? Practicing? Practicing for what? Spike asked. Well... Rainbow Dash began as she landed by Spike. I was practicing a routine for the mayor. She wants to throw a party for when the town's rebuilt, and she wants me to do an air show. I think she should just hire a Wonderbolt, but she says the town can't afford them right now. Wow, that's a drag, Spike said. He took a single sidestep, putting himself close to the door. I mean, I know how much you like the Wonderbolts. Yeah, but I guess I can't be too bummed out. My first full air show. And the mayor has even asked the old flying ace, a guy who used to be on the Wonderbolts, to help me plan my routine. There's going to be a full barrel rolls, corkscrews, and a triple axel. Wow, sure sounds like a great show.
Spike said as he turned to leave. Still, sounds like you've got a lot of practicing to do, so I'm just going to... Rainbow placed a hoof on Spike's tail, keeping him from walking away. Nice try, but you forgot who taught you that trick. Pinkie Pie? Rainbow took her hoof off Spike's tail, letting him turn back around as she spoke. Well, okay, yeah, but I was the one who taught her. That's my best trick for getting away from teachers at flight school. Rainbow Dash laughed a little as she trotted forward, looking around the throne room. So, what you doing in here? Nothing really, Spike admitted as he followed Rainbow. He watched her pick up the top of the throne. She then jumped into it and sat on the regal chair, with her hoofs kicked up against the backrest. I kind of had an argument with Rarity, and didn't want to go back to the library. I just needed to, you know. Yeah, I get it, Rainbow said, as she looked at the gemstone-studded mural of the ceiling. You just need to get outside and go someplace. Used to do that a lot when my parents got on my nerves. Lots of places to fly in Cloudsdale. So, you're not mad that I'm in here? Twilight asked. He walked to one side of the throne and rested his claws on the edge. You're not going to tell Twilight, are you? Rainbow laughed and placed a hoof on Spike's head before giving him a playful noogie. Nah, you're not hurting any pony. In fact, Rainbow sat up in her seat, a smile spreading on her lips. How about we check this place out? I didn't get to see much of it before the ponies started moving back to town. The mayor had me flying everywhere. Sure, Spike said, more than eager to join the impromptu exploration. Where should we go first? Rainbow tapped a hoof to her chin, pondering the thought for a moment before smiling. I know just the place. Wow, I didn't think these would be all the way down here, Rainbow commented as she and Spike reached the bottom of the long, spiralling staircase. Before them was the dungeon corridor, cells with the iron bars lined each side of the passage, and it was only dimly lit by the occasionally placed glowing gemstone. Rainbow, can't we go someplace else? This place is creepy. What's the matter, Spike? Rainbow asked as she began to walk forward. You think Night the Moon's gonna get you? No, Spike stuttered as he jogged to catch up with Rainbow. It's just... What if there are traps? Rainbow blew a raspberry. Please, I'm like a blue daring do. I can dodge any of those traps those foals of Nightmare could come up with. She spread her wings and jumped into the air. Check out these moves. With that, Rainbow Dash sprinted forward. She ran to the right-hand wall, then used her wings to keep her hoofs on the stone as she ran up the wall itself. She galloped along the ceiling, then jumped to the left wall. She leapt off the gain, did a backflip in the air, and then let herself drop to the ground. 2 final cartwheels, and then Rainbow skidded to a stop, with a triumphant smile, as if she had just beaten the most complex trap in the world. Rainbow quickly strode forward, panic filling her eyes as she put her hooves on the cell door, but it just slammed shut behind her. I told you to be careful, Spike lectured as he came jogging up. Well, I didn't know these doors could close on their own, Rainbow shouted from behind the bars. Daring Do never had to deal with cells that could close on their own. This has to be some kind of cheating. Now get me out of here. Really? Are you sure you want my help? Spike asked. Daring Do could probably get out on her own. Spike, let me out! Rainbow bellowed as she gripped and tried to shake the cell bars with her hooves. Okay, just hold on a second, Spike said as he glanced around. He then smiled and walked back in the direction of the door. Rainbow pressed her face up against the bars, trying to see where Spike was going, and eventually she saw him walk back into view carrying a set of keys. Here we go, Spike said as he unlocked the cell door. He pulled open the door and Rainbow Dash eagerly leapt out. Phew! The last thing I need is Applejack knowing I let myself get caught in a trap. She'd never let me live it down. Rainbow turned and pointed a hoof at Spike. This stays between us. Got it? Yeah, I got it, Spike said with a small laugh as he began to twirl the keyring on a claw. Where did you even find those keys anyway? Spike pointed over his shoulder with his free claw. They were just hanging on a hook over there. They just left them hanging there? Then why didn't Twilight get herself out? She could have just picked them up with her magic. She had an anti-magic collar on, Spike said. It's a metal neck brace that stops the unicorn from using their magic. I didn't know they made things like that. They have to, otherwise there'd be no way to stop unicorns who break the law. I never thought of it that way, Rainbow said as she began to trot away. Anyway, let's get out of here and see if we can find a secret treasure room or something. Yeah, sure, right behind... Rainbow didn't notice Spike trail off. She continued to trot towards the dungeon steps, and only when she was about to begin ascending them did she notice that she was by herself. Spike? She called out. She looked over to the empty hallway. Spike, where did you go?
Spike didn't answer, but Dash did hear the sound of the cell keys hitting the stone floor. She quickly trotted back to the cell that had slammed shut on her and looked inside. Spike had moved in through the door, letting the keys drop onto the floor as he went. He was resting his claw on the interior wall of the cell, a wall stained with a sizable smear of dark, aged blood. Spike? What are you doing? Rainbow asked again. She stepped slowly into the cell, keeping an eye on the door as she did. Spike ran a claw across the dried blood, his eyes transfixed on the stain. What did she do to you, Twilight? Spike? Why didn't you tell me she did this to you? Spike? Why would you keep this a secret? Hello? Spike? Equestria to Spike? He shook his head, finally being drawn from his thoughts. What is it, Rainbow? That's what I asked. You zoned out on me. Sorry, I just... Spike glanced back at the wall as he took his claw off it. There were some smudges of reddish brown on his palm. I got distracted. Well, how about you get distracted when we're out of here? Rainbow asked as she picked up the keys with her mouth. Now come on, let's go check out the library to this place. I'd bet my left hoof there's a bookcase in there that will swing open. Yeah, it will reveal a secret passage, and when we follow that passage, we'll find some big treasure room. And I bet we'll find enough money that I can hire the Wonderbolts to be my personal trainers. Then I'd get on their team for sure. Spike nodded half-heartedly and followed Rainbow out of the cell. Yeah, sure. After spending an hour trying to find a secret treasure room in Nightstone Castle, Rainbow and Spike admitted defeat and returned to Ponyville. Their first destination was Sugar Cube Corner, where they got an ice cream. It was a substantially less valuable reward than the hidden hoard of golden jewels they had hoped for, but the cool treat was a good consolation prize for their efforts. With ice cream in claw and wing, they took a seat at a table on one side of the room. The normally bustling shop was oddly quiet. Pinkie Pie was out throwing a party someplace else, Mr. Cake was sweeping behind the counter, and Mrs. Cake was back in the kitchen, and the twins were likely napping upstairs. Rainbow took a large bite from her ice cream in her bowl, smiling contentedly as her cheeks puffed out. Spike was less eager. He picked up a spoon and examined the rainbow sprinkles that had dotted the dairy treat. They were a poor replacement for the crushed gemstones he really wanted on his ice cream, but they were better than nothing. Spike? Spike! Spike glanced up from his ice cream, shaking his head a little as his mind came back to reality. What? Yikes! You're a space case today, you know that, Spike, Rainbow said with a teasing grin. I just wanted to know what you and Rarity were fighting about. Who says we were fighting? You did? When I found you in the castle, remember? Oh, yeah. Spike sighed, deposited the spoonful of the ice cream in his mouth, and dug his spoon back into the bowl. It was about Nyx. She face-planted into her bowl of cereal this morning. Wait, like a full face-plant? A whole head in a bowl? Spike nodded. Yeah. A snort escaped Rainbow's nose as she tried to contain her laughter. No way! That sounds hilarious! That's what I thought. I even made a joke about it. But then Nyx got mad and threw her bowl at me. I told Rarity, and then she started scolding me like I was the one that did something wrong. Spike stuffed another spoonful of ice cream into his mouth and chewed as he spoke. She and Twilight just don't want to see it. See what, Spike? Spike swallowed and heaped another big spoonful of ice cream into his mouth. That Nyx is one bad tantrum away from calling herself Nightmare Moon again. You should have seen her this morning. She's scary when she's mad. Pfft, that little squirt's not scary, Spike. She couldn't even scare Fluttershy's chickens. Rainbow snickered. Those chickens would probably chase her if she tried to scare them. But what about when she starts to get bigger, huh? Spike asked. She's still Nightmare Moon, even if she's had an attitude adjustment, and she can still turn evil again. Pfft, come on, Spike. You really can't be worried about that happening. You wouldn't be saying that if your family almost got hung, Spike mumbled, before stuffing his mouth with more ice cream. The smile on Rainbow Dash's face, and the cheerful tone in her voice, weakened. You're not just joking around, are you? Spike glared at Rainbow over his bowl. Really? What was your first clue? He deadpanned. Rainbow winced and rubbed the back of her neck nervously. Oh, yikes. Where's Fluttershy when you need her? She whispered before looking back at Spike. Listen, you know, it's like
No, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Rainbow put her hooves to her face and dug them down, stretching out her eyelids and cheeks. Ugh, why is it so hard? It's okay, Rainbow, you don't have to say anything, Spike said. He got up from his seat, leaving his ice cream half eaten, and began to walk towards the door. I know you probably don't believe me anyway. No pony does. Rainbow quickly got up from her seat and flew to catch with Spike. Now wait, I didn't mean that, it's just... I'm not good at this kind of stuff, you know. Spike nodded his head. He let Rainbow lead him back to the table and ice cream. Yeah, I know. Probably the same reason I haven't really talked to Twilight about it. Well, I thought you said she wouldn't listen, Rainbow commented as she climbed back into her seat. I mean, how can you be so sure about it if you haven't even talked to her? Spike picked up his spoon again and sank it deep into the ice cream, which was beginning to melt and run. She won't. I know she won't. She doesn't want to think that Nyx is the same as when she was ruling Equestria. She wants to think that she's back to the little filly that she found in the forest. Well, isn't she kind of both? Spike glanced up from his ice cream and arched an eyebrow. What do you mean? Nyx. She's the one that Twilight found in the forest, and that took over Equestria. Well, no duh, Rainbow, Spike said. Who else could it be? Rainbow ruffled her mane, frustrated by her inability to articulate herself. No, what I mean is, you make it sound like there's a different Nyx. There's one that we have now, and she's the one that took over Equestria, and the one that Twilight found, but you're acting like she's a different Nyx from the Nyx that Twilight found. And you make it sound like Twilight thinks that this Nyx is the same Nyx that she found in the forest, but not the same Nyx that took over Equestria. Ugh, did I say that right? Rainbow crossed her eyes and rubbed her forehead. Wait, I think it's like I messed up. It's okay, Rainbow Dash. I get it, Spike said, a bit of annoyance in his tone. Are you sure? Because I think I could say it right this time. Spike shook his head. He put one last spoonful of ice cream in his mouth before he got up from his chair. No, it's okay. I need to go and pick Nyx up anyway. I'll see you around, he said half-heartedly. Rainbow smiled, nodded, and waved goodbye to Spike. She then leaned back in her seat and kicked her rear hooves up under the table, while putting her fore hooves behind her head. Heh! Twilight and Fluttershy aren't the only ones who can do this. The stick in Spike's claw bounced against a post on the fence, striking with a wooden thunk as it hit each post. He was walking down the dirt road, leaving the city limits of Ponyville, on his way to Sweet Apple Acres. He wasn't in any rush, and he wasn't even paying attention to the road. His eyes were instead wandering across the horizon and the lazy clouds above him. Rainbow's words were rattling around inside his head like bolts in a can. They just wouldn't stay quiet. He hadn't forgotten about who Nyx used to be. That was the problem. He did remember. He remembered how she acted before school ended, at the start of summer. And she was different now. Nyx's new temper aside, there was just something wrong. He felt like he couldn't trust her. He felt it in his gut. Just like Twilight knew something was wrong during her brother's wedding. Spike was snapped out of his thoughts by a loud yelp, and he quickly looked to his side. Parked along the side of the road was a wooden cart that he hadn't noticed. The Apple family's market cart. The yelp had come from Applejack, who had been working to quickly mend some part of the cart when Spike's stick had whacked her in the side of the head. Whoa! Sorry, Applejack, I didn't see you there, Spike said, quickly disregarding the stick. Applejack rubbed the side of her head before adjusting her hat. For the sake of every pony, Spike, could you try keeping your eyes on where you're walking? The last thing we need is more ponies and dragons bounding around like Rainbow Dash. Applejack rubbed her head again, and then walked towards the front of the cart. She began reconnecting the hitch of the wagon, which had been tied together with rope. I'm so sorry, Applejack. She sighed and put on a smile. I know, and you didn't do no harm. You just caught me off guard. Serves me right, I suppose. I should have noticed you walking up, but I was fixing this damn cart again. What happened? Spike asked, as he looked over the roughly fixed hitch. I hit a bump in the road, and one of the supports snapped clean off. Cart still rolls fine, but without this fix, I'd have to push it back to the farm, or pull it with my teeth. She slipped into the hitch, rolling her shoulders to ensure a good fit. Personally, neither of those options were really inviting, so I decided just to get it fixed up right quick. It ain't a fix at last, but it'll get me back to the farm. Speaking of Spike, what are you doing out this way? Applejack asked. She put her weight into the hitch, and the cart began to roll, and Spike walked alongside, keeping pace. What do you mean? Well, did Nyx leave something on the farm, or did you need apples? I haven't picked Nyx up yet. I'm going to get her right now, Spike answered. But you were supposed to pick her up 2 hours ago. Where have you been? I got caught up doing something with Rainbow. Besides, I'm sure Nyx doesn't mind. She probably hasn't even noticed. But Spike, you know what Twilight said. She don't want Nyx being anywhere without some pony keeping an eye on her. Spike rolled his eyes. Twilight's just being paranoid. Besides, Nyx is with your brother. No, she ain't, Applejack said, starting to pick up the pace. What do you mean? Spike, there is a reason we wanted you to pick up Nyx when we did. Big Mac has to haul a load of apples to the next town over. He had to leave an hour and a half ago. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to make it back home before nightfall. So, did he leave Nyx alone? Spike asked, a twinge of worry in his voice. Applejack shook her head and tried to pull the wagon faster, without breaking the hitch again. Nah, I reckon he got Granny Smith to keep an eye on her and Apple Bloom. Then what's the problem? Spike asked. Granny Smith don't exactly have the best opinion of Nyx right now, Applejack said, a very serious tone in her voice. Come on, Granny Smith is the kindest old mare I've ever met. She couldn't hate any pony. She's as sweet as the day is long when you're on her good side. But when you ain't, Applejack shuddered. She has spitfire, vinegar, and rusty nails all rolled into one. We haven't been able to even mention Nyx's name in the house since the town's reconstruction started. Is she really that bad? Spike asked. Pink Pie once accidentally ate a slice from a pie Granny Smith was saving for her friends when they came over to play bridge. After that, and after the chewing that Granny gave her, Pink Pie baked a fresh pie for Granny every morning for a month, just to get back on her good side. And, to this day, Pinkie Pie doesn't eat anything out of our kitchen without asking Granny's permission first. Knowing Pinkie Pie and her tendency to eat any sweets in sight, Spike was beginning to see why Applejack was so concerned. They picked up the pace, trying to get back to Sweet Apple Acres as fast as possible. Applejack and Spike entered the front yard of Sweet Apple Acres to find the situation worse than they had imagined. Granny Smith was standing in front of the barn, shouting out and glaring down a police stallion from the Ponyville Police Department. The blue-coated stallion was being a proper professional, writing down everything Granny Smith said with his unicorn magic, but the tone in his voice made it clear that his own patience was running very short. Now, ma'am, I've explained. I cannot arrest a filly unless she's perpetrated a crime.
What about taking over Equestria? What about kidnapping my granddaughter? Ain't them crimes good enough for you?
Ma'am, please, the stallion officer began. I've told you, the filly known as Nyx has already been tried and punished by the princesses for those crimes. She cannot be arrested a second time. If you feel she has committed a new crime, then I will gladly file a report and ensure it is looked into. Otherwise, there is nothing I can do.
Nothing you can do, my creaky knee, Granny snapped back at the officer. You police ain't good for nothing no more. No, or you'll just twiddle your hooves and get fat on donuts. What next? You gonna be keeping timber wolves for pets? Or maybe you'd like to go and get yourself one of them lupus majors. Sure, that's what every colt needs. A pet that can bite its head off faster than you can blink. Granny!
Applejack scolded. She unhitched herself from the wagon and quickly put herself between her grandmother and the police officer.
What are you doing? I'm doing what you and that Twilight Sparkle don't have enough sense to do. Granny, we'll talk about this later,
Applejack said firmly. Before turning to the police stallion, she began to apologise as profusely as she could. She even removed her hat and held it to her chest. At the same time, Spike went over towards the farmhouse, where Apple Bloom was sitting on top of an upside-down apple basket. What happened? Spike asked, once he was close to Apple Bloom. Did Nyx eat her pie or something?
I didn't do anything.
Spike arched an eyebrow and then lowered his head to the upside-down basket. He peered through one of the cracks and saw that Nyx was lying down inside. What are you doing under a basket? Spike asked Nyx before looking up at Apple Bloom. And, why are you sitting on the basket?
Because Granny Smith told us to.
The two fillies answered in unison. Why?
Well, 'cause you weren't here to pick Nyx up, Apple Bloom answered him. Big Mac had to ask Granny Smith to keep an eye on her. He and I were expecting Granny to start shouting right there and then, since we hadn't told her Nyx was on the farm. But she was right nice about it to start with. But then, once my brother was gone, she told Nyx to get onto the basket and told me to sit on it and not to let her out. She then called that police officer and they've been arguing for the past hour.
She's been going at this for an hour? Spike asked.
Yes, Nick said.
Whoa. Surprised she hasn't yelled herself hoarse yet.
It's not funny, Spike, Nick whined. If you had been here on time, none of this would have happened. Why didn't you come to pick me up?
Spike winced and rubbed the back of his neck. Look, Nix. I'm sorry, but I got tied up doing something with Rainbow Dash. I just lost track of time.
Can we go home now?
Spike nodded. Yes, let's just get you out from under this basket. He motioned for Applebloom to jump off, and as he did, he placed a claw on the side of the basket. He lifted it up just enough for Nix to crawl out before letting it drop back to the ground.
Hey, don't you be letting her out! She's going straight to jail once I took some sense into this rockhead!
Granny Smith snapped as she began to hobble over towards Spike and the fillies.
Granny Smith!
That's enough! Applejack said firmly.
Now, don't you be taking that tone, missy! You ain't too big to get a spanking from me!
Granny Smith shouted back.
Granny, please. Nix is my friend,
Applebloom pleaded.
Why can't you be nice? You didn't used to treat her like this before.
That's because she hadn't locked you up before. Granny Smith lifted a shaky hoof and pointed it at Nix, who had ducked behind Spike.
That's because we didn't know she was Nightmare Moon. You can't trust Nightmare Moon. She's the most backstabbing mare that has ever lived, betraying her sister like that, and I won't let you lock her up again.
Granny, Applebloom has forgiven Nix for that. Scoot, even the princesses have forgiven her for what she did.
That don't matter, because I haven't, Granny Smith snapped firmly. Once an apple's gone bad, it's gone bad, and there ain't no going good again. You got to throw it out before it spoils the whole barrel, and that's what we need to do to her. I don't trust her, and I don't want her near any of my kids, especially you, Applebloom. My gut says she's bad, and my gut has never lied to me before. Why? It's my gut that keeps them bad apples out of cider every year.
That's enough, Granny, Applejack said firmly, before looking at Applebloom. Take Granny inside and get her sat down in her chair. I'll be right behind you. She then turned to look at Spike. And you'd best take Nix home too, Spike. And next time, try to be on time.
Yeah, okay, Spike said quickly, ushering Nix away as Applebloom tried to very gently show Granny Smith inside. This left Applejack to turn back to the police officer and once again apologise for her grandmother's behaviour. Spike stared into the bathroom mirror that evening, brushing his teeth before bed. The rest of the evening had been uneventful. They had gotten back into the library, had dinner when they were supposed to, and Nix had gone to bed without any fuss. She hadn't even wanted a bedtime story. She had just wanted to go to sleep. He was pretty tired himself, and was intending to hit the hay as soon as he had finished in the bathroom. Still, as he stared at himself in the bathroom mirror, his mouth full of toothpaste foam, he couldn't help but glance at another part of the mirror's reflection, the bathroom door. It was cracked ever so slightly, letting him see into the dark bedroom. Setting down a toothbrush and rinsing his mouth, Spike got down from his stool near the sink and crept up to the door. He cracked it open a little further and peered into the darkened room. His eyes adjusted slowly. At first, he couldn't see anything, but then rough shapes began to form. He saw the beds, the shelves. He saw... Spike's heart jumped in his chest and he retreated back into the bathroom, gasping as a rush of adrenaline pumped through his system. He grabbed his tail out of instinct and tried to calm himself down, even as he heard his heartbeat pumping in his ears. No, he couldn't have seen. It was impossible. Swallowing nervously, Spike peered through the crack in the door again, focusing on the spot in the room that had just scared him so badly. His breathing then began to calm. He had thought, for a moment, he had seen Nightmare Moon towering in the back of the room. But it wasn't her. It was something far less dangerous. A shadow formed by the window curtains and one of the library's many unicorn busts. It had been nothing but a shadow, but the sight alone made him shift his gaze to Nix. She was sleeping soundly in her bed, innocent and unaware of Spike's watchful stare. And, as he watched her, his mind began to echo with the familiar voices of Rainbow Dash, Rarity, and Granny Smith. Nix throwing a bowl doesn't mean she's turning evil again. My gut says she's bad, and my guts never lied to me before. She couldn't scare Fluttershy's chickens. Once an apple's gone bad, it's gone bad. There ain't no going good again. You got to throw it out before it spoils the whole barrel, and that's what we need to do to her. Was Nix's situation so different from your own? You can't trust Nightmare Moon. She's the most backstabbing mare that's ever lived. Spike groaned and stepped away from the door and looked up at the bathroom mirror. He didn't even know what to think anymore. Rainbow and Rarity weren't scared of Nyx, but Granny Smith was. Did that mean Granny was being overly paranoid? Or were Rarity and Rainbow not being paranoid enough? And what about him? He had started the day somewhere in the middle, and now he didn't know where he was. He was still scared, but he didn't know whether the fear was well-founded or not. He didn't know if he was right to be scared. But I thought you said she wouldn't listen. I mean, how can you know for sure if you haven't talked to her about it? For a brief moment, Rainbow Dash's words echoed above the clatter of the others. It was a rare moment when she had something so sagely to say, but at that moment, they were the words that Spike needed. Twilight trotted towards the library door. She had been on the evening train from Canterlot, which put her into Ponyville well after sunset. Normally, staying up so late wouldn't be a problem for her, but after a long weekend, she was looking forward to a good night's sleep. Stifling a yawn, Twilight reached the door, but noticed the light was coming out the windows. Spike must have left the lantern on, she said to herself as she pushed the door open and slipped inside. Yet she found the lights had not been left on. Spike was still awake, sitting on the steps that led up to the bedroom, as he held a picture frame in his claws. "Ah, Spike," Twilight said, as she set her bags down and closed the door behind her. "You didn't have to wait up for me." Spike looked up from the picture, a flicker of a smile forming on his face. "Yeah, I guess, but I wanted to see you when you first got home. So, how did things go?" "Well, I got the paperwork filled and signed as needed, and my visit with my parents went as well as I could have hoped. Shining Armour even came to Canterlot when he heard I was going to be there. It was so nice. I can't remember the last time the four of us sat down to a family dinner like that. We just sat and talked about, well, everything, except Nyx." "Why not Nyx?" Spike asked. "Wasn't she the whole reason you made the trip?" "Yeah, but Shining Armour just didn't want to talk about it at all. I mean, my parents aren't as worried anymore. Princess Luna was even kind enough to assure him that I wasn't brainwashed like the children of Nightmare were. Still, Shining, he just didn't want to talk about it." Twilight sighed, but put on a smile as she trotted towards the staircase where Spike was sitting. "Still, I'm sure he'll come around. Now, come on, let's both get to bed before we fall asleep standing up." "Yeah, okay," Spike said as Twilight walked past him on the stairs. He, however, didn't stand up. He looked back down at the framed picture in his claws and then drew in a breath. "Actually, Twilight, can we talk about something?" Twilight paused on the steps and looked back at Nyx. "Talk about what?" "It's about Nyx." Twilight turned around and walked down the staircase until she was standing next to Spike. She looked over his shoulder and saw him holding an old photo of him and her, a picture taken not long after he had been hatched. "What about her?" she asked. "Did something happen?" "Well, there was something that happened at Applejack's farm, but that's not what I wanted to talk to you about, Twilight. I'm kind of still scared of Nyx." "Oh, Spike," Twilight said with a small giggle and a roll of her eyes. "Why would you be—" "'Cause she almost got you killed," he snapped, his grip on the photo frame tightening. "And she hurt you. She hurt you bad." "What do you mean, Spike?" Twilight asked. "I saw the blood. What did Nyx do to you? Did she cut you? Did she beat you up? What did she do?" "Easy, Spike," Twilight said, trying to calm him down. "Just take a breath and start from the beginning. What blood are you talking about?" "Well," Spike began, knowing he could be getting himself into trouble for this. "Yesterday I ended up exploring Nightstone Castle with Rainbow Dash. I know I'm not supposed to go in there, but I had just fought with Rarity and well, it's okay, Spike. Keep going." "Well," he stuttered, "while Rainbow and I were exploring, we found the castle's dungeons, and in one of the cells, there was this blood stain on one of the walls. It was so big, and except for Nyx's friends, you were the only one down there, and... "Shh," Twilight said. She lay down on the step next to Spike, hooking her forelegs around him and resting her head against his. The baby dragon was on the verge of tears, but he was trying his hardest not to cry. "It's okay, Spike. It's okay." "But she hurt you, Twilight." Twilight held Spike a little tighter, both to comfort him and herself. "Spike, Nyx never laid a hoof on me. Yes, her guards beat me up a little, but Nyx never even touched me." But
Then where did all the blood come from? Spike asked as he leaned into Twilight's embrace. Twilight bit her lip a moment, then sighed and spoke quietly to Spike. I think the blood you saw was from when I stabbed Nyx. Spike pulled away, his eyes widened in disbelief. You what? When Nyx was starting to act like herself again, after she freed her friends, Spell Nexus came to my cell. Twilight lowered her head a little, guilt hanging heavily on her voice. He blessed me, like the rest of the children of Nightmare, and then ordered me to stab Nyx with a magical dagger the next time she visited my cell. But why would he do that? Spike asked. I mean, he was brainwashed like the rest, wasn't he? He wanted to serve Nightmare Moon. Why would he want you to hurt her? I don't know for sure. He just said something about giving his queen what she needed instead of what she wanted. Twilight paused and used her magic to lift the picture frame from Spike's claws, looking at the image fondly for a moment before she continued. Still, Spike, I promise that Nyx never hurt me. Yeah, well, what about all the other stuff she did? He asked. We can't just forget about all that. I'm not saying that we should, Spike, Twilight clarified. Nyx made mistakes, and she knows she made them. But we all make mistakes, Spike, some of which are bigger than others. Still, these mistakes help us learn. It's like a burning hoof on a stove. Once you've done it once, you know what the consequences will be if you do it again. After all, I know a sweet little dragon who made the little mistake of being too greedy on his birthday, Twilight said, trying to keep her tone as sweet and caring as possible, as she put the picture frame back in Spike's claws. But what if she makes those mistakes again? He asked. I don't want you to get hurt. Well, that's why Nyx needs us to be here for her. Twilight leaned in and nuzzled the side of his face. When you make a mistake, one that you never want to make again, that's when you want to turn to your friends and your family. They can help you remember what happened, help keep you from making the same mistakes again. Twilight leaned in, pointing her hoof at the picture in Spike's claws. Do you remember back when you had just hatched, when you tried to eat the gems in Princess Celestia's crown? A small blush formed on Spike's cheeks as a smile formed on his lips. Yeah, I remember. You were reading a book, and I was hungry. And then the princess came in. She set her crown down for a moment, and when she put it back on, I was still trying to chew its jewel out of the gold. And I never forgot to feed you dinner after that. At least until you were old enough to take care of yourself a little bit, Twilight said, before she leaned in to nuzzle Spike. And right now, Nyx needs you and me to help her, to remind her about what happened should she ever start down that road again. Spike nodded his head a little and leaned into Twilight. He was still kind of scared, but now he had something he could do. Nyx wasn't evil now, and he could help make sure she stayed that way. Thanks, Twilight. This helped. It was no problem, Spike, she said as she stood up and turned to head upstairs. Now come on, let's go get some sleep. Okay. Spike began to climb the steps alongside Twilight. Soon, the lights around the library were dimmed and Spike settled into the warm embrace of his bed. His eyes began to slide shut, and he rolled over and looked across the bedroom. Nyx was still asleep in her bed, and Twilight had passed out on her pillow. All was peaceful, and with a smile on his face, Spike drifted off to sleep. He dreamed a good dream that night, a restful one that he would remember fondly in the morning. It was a dream of Nyx getting chased by Fluttershy's chickens.